Our third and final panel for today is titled Affordable Water for a More Resilient California. This panel will be moderated by Aquanetta Warren, the mayor for the city of Fontana, and also well and Tad graduated from our very first class. Welcome, Mayor Warren. Nice to see you.
Hello, everyone. There we go. Thank you for the wonderful introduction, Ares. I'm thrilled to be here today. This is a great topic we're going to talk about. And might I say that I think the group that got me best learned or knowledgeable in this area was WELL, being a WELLO. It became quite apparent to me in that class that there was some issues going on. To start off our panel, this topic is going to be a topic that kind of brings all of the panels together. We're going to be talking about water affordability and reliability. This is an issue so close to my heart. So without further ado, let's get started. Our first panelist is June Lopez, the General Manager of Moulton Niguel Water District. Next is Alfred Martini, Operation Manager and Senior Litigation Paralegal with SL Environmental Law Group. Last but not least is Aaron Baker, Chief Operating Officer at Valley Water. Thanks to all of you panelists for joining us today in this great discussion. You all know the drill by now. Each panelist has 7 minutes to present on water affordability and resiliency in the state. From there, we'll jump into what will surely be a lively conversation and Q&A from the audience. If any questions or comments come up for you during this discussion, please feel free to type them out by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. At this time, let's have June present first. As for the rest of us, let's all turn off all our microphones and cameras, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mayor. And I just want to start by thanking, well, everyone that put this conference together and for inviting me to share with you some of our perspective from the different agencies that I've worked with and all the people that I've learned from. And typically we would all be in the same room, getting to know one another, but we're still in that virtual world. So I hope you're all doing well. And I always encourage everyone after my presentation, I love getting feedback, not just feedback, but also pushback. So if there's anything that I say that you agree or disagree with, would love to hear from you. So we'll start the presentation with the first slide. So just to tell you a little bit about me and the agency that I work for, I'm the general manager of Moulton Niguel Water District. We provide water and wastewater service and recycled water service to 6 cities in South Orange County. But over the course of my years, I've had the privilege of working all throughout California, Northern California, Southern California, urban, ag, disadvantaged community, affluent community, private water company, public water company. And through all this, what I've realized is it's about the broader community of California. And this is why I'm so grateful for the work that WELL does, and led by Victor, who I've known for many years, is that we need all the electeds, regardless of whether you're involved in water or not, to really lean in and provide us the much needed leadership. Now, as an industry, we've done well over the years. I mean, when you turn on the tap, water comes out, and that's pretty much the metrics that we look at. But coming out of 2020, and the unprecedented events that we've witnessed, and going forward, and really, we're not out of the woods yet. All these things we're talking about, climate change, the pandemic, all these things are still very much within our reality. And things as they go longer always get worse. And not to sound pessimistic, but I try to be realistic and be very self-aware so we can really find path to a better future. And this path is lined up with people like yourselves. And of course, you're tuning into this because you get it. So hopefully with all the information that you get today, that you'll be able to share with other colleagues, other elected officials that may have not weighed in as much as you have done, and see opportunity and the necessity of all of you getting involved. So even though in different parts of the state, we all realize that we all have to link arms and work together with different sectors, with different communities, because that's how we get better as an industry. I'm going to share a couple of points that kind of illustrate how far we have to go. So in California, there are over 1 million people who still do not have access to safe and reliable drinking water. In California alone, there's about 3,000 water providers. As opposed to you look at your electricity, there's really 3 major ones: SDG&E, Edison, PG&E. So there is a lot of fragmentation in how the water is provided. You talked about human rights to water. When that was first presented as an industry, as a water industry, we actually opposed human rights to water. Now, there were some really good, valid reasons, but nevertheless, the optics of it and just what that shows was not the best time, I would say, for our sector. And then when you look at COVID, there was a lot of funding made available, but as previous speakers said, those funding do not come directly to the water providers. So we haven't, I think we would say we can do a better job of telling our story and advocating for the needs of the people in our community. And there are parts of California where they are still using wooden flumes and redwood storage tanks. So you talked about infrastructure. So there's a long ways that we have to go. And that's why this is such an important conversation. And your involvement is so critical, because the electeds, you have the platform. And whether you are a city, whether you are a water elected officials, we all serve the same constituents. So by working together, we can give ourselves better platforms and better advantages in getting not only the funding that's needed to make sure that we have safe and affordable drinking water, but also that we have the right partnerships and people. Because I always like to say, we're not just in the utility business, we are in the people business. So next slide. So next slide is, well, why does this matter? Again, you're all here because you do realize that reliability and affordability matter. But the recent events in the last handful of years really highlighted that. The last historic drought, the importance of reliability. And when you don't have that reliability, what happens? You have economic downturn in your community because there isn't enough water for development. You have issues like homeless, housing, and all these other issues that are top of mind for most electeds. Yet we sometimes forget how water serves all those key issues. Part of the solution, for example, with homeless is building housing. And yet if there are not enough water to accommodate that, then we are not finding the best solutions. So this is why when it comes to water, as previous speakers have mentioned, everything is related. And if we don't see that connection all the time, this is where we need to have the conversation to be much more aware of that connectivity. And when it comes to affordability, we know that with the pandemic, people were not shut off with water. When you see the water debt, that's increasing. Now, there are some fundings made available which will help, but going into the future, as cost of everything increases, how do we ensure that everyone can afford this much needed resources? And what we find is that, especially in time of crisis, and we saw this in spades, is in times of crisis, the impact to especially those communities that are vulnerable and disadvantaged are disproportionate compared to other communities. So when you look at the overall economic landscape coming out of COVID, people will tell you it wasn't so bad. When you kind of level everything out, when you total, when you aggregate of everything, it wasn't so bad. But that's the overarching view. Really, when you get into the people impact, those communities, people of color, communities of disadvantage, those communities and groups were hit very hard during this time. So going forward, we need to think about that, because those are the underrepresented. Those are sometimes without the strong voice. And we all have to speak as a collective for these communities, because I always say, you never know where you're going to end up in California. You have friends and you have people that you care about and love that work in and live in these communities. And you never know, you may end up in one of these communities. So we have to think much more comprehensively and collectively about these solutions. So we learned about public health and safety. I don't think I need to go into that too much. I mean, if there was a year that really highlighted that, that was 2020. So we need to build off of that awareness and tell a better story. And Victor always says this, you got to tell the right story and tell it right. And in order to tell our story, we need friends. We need friends to help us share our story. Because as an industry, I don't think we have done as good of a job as we can. Because as we talked about in previous panelists, there just isn't as much awareness. There isn't as much support and funding that's needed. And all these conditions are getting worse and harder as we go. And as Anatol said, it's complex, but it's not complicated. Because we as people in the water industry, it's not the lack of funding, it's not the lack of water, it's not the lack of ideas, it's the lack of the human will, the political will. And this is where it's important to recognize that all these issues can be overcome. It's not an insolvable problem, but the will has to be there of the people. And this is why we need others to give us a little bit of a nudge, a little bit of social pressure to say, for those who are decision maker, for those who are in water, we need you to do more. And have that support, have that pressure. And I know some people are not going to agree with this. Some of my colleagues will say, what are you talking about? But we need a little push to be better than what we can be today. And so next slide, please. What you should know. Again, if you are not a water board member, but you deal in communities that obviously have these districts, what you'll find is that in one city, you can have more than one water provider. And understanding who they are, how they function, how they're governed, who the board members are, how decisions are made, those are important things to know. And I know as elected officials, there are so many things that you have to deal with. But water, again, is such a critical issue, and holding all of ourselves accountable is really important, because sometimes we don't know what we don't know. And if you find out that there are things that are happening within that water agency or in your community, the one who's going to get the phone call is you, because the constituents look to council members and assembly members and senators to really understand what's going on, because people don't realize sometimes where their water even comes from and who their water provider is, and how do you get a hold of them? How do you hold them accountable? This is why part of the solution is about sort of checking all of ourselves and saying, are we doing enough? And what can we do better? And fixing those issues that could be very helpful. And as the previous panel, Carmen Ramirez said, she said, you know, when you look at all these water agencies, it is a bit like a kingdom, and no one wants to give up what they have. But this is where we as a collective, again, have to really step back and say, what is the right structure? What is the right path to be able to deliver this water in a safe, affordable way for all the communities of California? So the accountability factor is very important. Final slide. The path to affordability and reliability. One of the things that I've certainly learned in this agency and other agency is that when it comes to reliability, there's so many opportunities that can happen today, and that's demand management, conservation, water use efficiency. These are all slightly different, but there are things that we can do now to ensure that we have sufficient water to support all these issues in our communities. It's just that we haven't done enough in terms of managing the demand. And when you look at the power sector, they've done a lot of work in this area. And this allows for there to be affordability and reliability, because if we can be efficient in our water use and make water available, then you also don't have to invest as much. You always have supply projects, but not as much. And with right data, and this is a whole new frontier for us, bringing big data, not just things on Excel spreadsheet or in boxes or on paper, but really the high level data that in the world that we live in. By better understanding the water needs and what we need to do, we can right size projects, we can right size our efforts, we can make sure that we're not overspending or underspending. But without data, how will you know? How will we hold ourselves accountable for our actions? So that's a whole different frontier that we have really immersed ourselves into. And this has been a very valuable area, because with other friends, and I'll just give you a quick one, we worked with Netflix a couple of years ago. And by working with them and having access to their tools and their expertise, which they gave us for free, we saved $20 million in 6 months. And that's the kind of thing that we can do when we expand our horizon and build these kinds of partnership with the right technology and the tools and the right partnership to really move us forward. And you've heard a lot about funding opportunities, but there are funding opportunities beyond what we've talked about conventionally. There are foundations, there are institutions that are willing to invest in water. And again, in order to find out, in order to be effective, we need to link arms with lots of friends. And so I thank you for your time. I hope this made sense, and I look forward to your questions and any feedback that you have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. There I am. All right, there we go. Thank you so much, Yoon. I have so many questions about your presentation that I can't wait to ask you about. But before we get into that, our next presenter is Alfred Martini from SL Environmental Law Group. Fred, feel free to unmute yourself and turn on your camera and just start presenting.
Thank you, Mayor Warren, for the introduction, and thank you to Will for the opportunity to speak here today. I'm going to be going over 3 points concerning a family of man-made chemical contaminants known as PFAS, which we've heard of a little bit about from previous speakers today. Next slide, please. The points I'm going to cover are what PFAS are, expected cost to treat them if they're detected in your water supply, and how litigation can be used to recover those costs to help keep water affordable. So what is PFAS? Next slide, please. PFAS is an acronym for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, a family of chemicals that includes PFOA and PFOS. PFAS have been manufactured and used in the United States since the 1940s. And more recently, they've been classified as persistent organic pollutants, meaning they resist breaking down naturally, earning the nickname forever chemicals, and have been found widely dispersed in the environment. What makes these chemicals so unique is they share a molecular structure that includes one of the strongest bonds in nature, which explains why they resist breaking down naturally, and why products made from them were a commercial success. As you can see in the next slide, PFAS could be found in a variety of products. Most of these are consumer goods, but the single largest contamination source has been from aqueous film-forming foam, known as AFFF. This is a foam that is used to extinguish liquid fuel fires, as depicted here in the top right-hand corner. For decades, this product, AFFF, was applied directly to the environment in firefighting training exercises, often near airports where fuel fires are a common hazard. So what makes PFAS a problem? They are a problem because these chemicals adhere to the proteins in our blood and tissue, which causes them to build up as our exposure to them continues over time. This is called bioaccumulation, and what it can do to our bodies is alarming. Next slide, please. California's Prop 65 has listed PFOA and PFOS as chemicals known to cause reproductive harm. And the C8 Science Panel, a multi-year study of over 69,000 participants, concluded that a probable link exists between PFOA exposure and 6 health conditions, including testicular cancer, kidney cancer, and thyroid disease. This is a serious problem. In California alone, over 230 water systems have had detections of PFAS in their water supplies, as represented in the dots, the red dots on this map. Next slide, please. Due to the widespread nature of this problem, the federal EPA began rulemaking in 2009 with a provisional health advisory, and then in 2016 with a lifetime health recommendation for PFOA and PFOS. Because these were unenforceable guidelines, states like California started their own regulatory investigation. As the timeline on the next slide indicates, California is moving towards an enforceable drinking water standard. These are just a few of the data points, but the trend from the state has been to lower the response notification levels that water systems must meet and expand the investigation and regulatory action to include additional PFAS compounds beyond PFOA and PFOS. Based on communications my colleagues have had with state officials, we anticipate California will have a maximum contaminant level, which is an enforceable drinking water standard for PFOA and PFOS by 2023. When that happens, impacted water systems will need to adopt treatment solutions to meet these standards, incurring some of the costs on this next slide. So my firm has been representing impacted water systems for the past 18 years, helping them secure funds for treatment solutions, such as those needed for PFAS. And based on our experience, we estimate that a small impacted water system with one well can expect to pay between $3 and $10 million to respond to PFAS contamination for an estimated 30 years. And that's a real problem, as you heard from the previous speakers, that funding is so tight these days. So who is going to pay these costs? Next slide, please. Will it be the government with taxpayer dollars, the ratepayers who, as you heard previously, may already be struggling with water affordability, or the companies whose products cause the problems, the companies who manufactured and profited from PFAS, the same companies who knew about the health risks created by these products for decades, but continue to sell them. So then the question becomes, why would it be right for those companies to pay? Well, just imagine that you bought a laptop. Next slide, please. And as one normally does when the battery runs out, you recharge it and it bursts into flames, and the ensuing fire consumes your home. Wouldn't you want the manufacturer of that computer to pay for the damage caused by that fire? You did nothing wrong. You're using the computer like it should be used. And between you and the manufacturer, it is the manufacturer who is in the best position to make sure their products are safe. And more importantly, if they are held responsible for the harm caused by their products, then they are incentivized to make sure that their products are safe before placing them in the marketplace. So now, who do you think should pay for PFAS treatment? Next slide, please. If you think it's the chemical manufacturers, you're not alone. 57 water systems in California have already filed suit against major chemical manufacturers for the cost to respond to PFAS in their drinking water supplies. These are product liability cases which allege, in part, that the products that contain PFAS were defective, similar to the laptop analogy you heard earlier. Using legal action to recover water treatment costs is not new. My firm has been doing this work for 18 years and have recovered over $1 billion for our clients. Making polluters pay for water contamination just makes sense. And it is a way to ensure that clean drinking water is affordable and available to all of us. Next slide, please. If you are one of the many systems that have PFAS in your water supply or any other man-made contaminant, I strongly encourage you to seek out legal counsel to advise you of any claims your system may have. The last thing you want to be is a community that misses out on the ability to recover the cost of treatment because of inaction. Thank you for your time. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out.
Outstanding. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
At this time, last but not least, is Aaron Baker joining us from Valley Water. Go ahead and take the stage, Aaron.
All right, well, thank you so much.
You can start.
No, it's my fault. Sorry, Aaron. Let me pull up your presentation.
Okay,
I
good.
downloaded it. There it is.
I've got a copy if we can pull it off. So
We're good. All right. Screen sharing now.
okay. Well, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Well. First time presenter to a Well conference, but so far I've learned so much. I'm Aaron Baker. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the Water Utility Enterprise for Valley Water. I have the pleasure of being the last presentation of the conference, and I've been allotted 7 minutes, so buckle up, as I know I'm the only thing separating you from lunch. We believe safe, clean, reliable water is a basic human right and should be available to all. I'm here to present some of the water realities that we are facing here in Santa Clara County, and probably similar realities in your jurisdiction in the balancing act between reliability and affordability. I'm hoping to give you some insight on how water is part of everything and what it takes to bring water to the people. Next slide, please. Valley Water is a special district formed in 1929. Our mission is to provide Santa Clara County with affordable, clean water, flood protection, and healthy environment. We also believe that these are basic services that everybody in the county should be afforded. An integrated, socially equitable, and balanced approach in managing sustainable water, effective natural flood protection, and healthy watersheds is essential to the future of all communities served. As I mentioned, water is key to a healthy environment, but with a limited amount of water on the earth, and fish and wildlife don't pay water rights, finding the balancing act between affordable water supply and flows for the environment are some of the things that we are tackling right now here at Valley Water. Fortunately, the great residents of Santa Clara County just passed Measure S to help us ensure a healthy environment with clean water. Next slide, please. Most of you probably know where Santa Clara County is. We like to say it's the heart of Silicon Valley. We serve 15 cities and almost 2 million people. As was mentioned previously with multiple presenters here, most people turn on their tap and don't think twice about where their water comes from, or think about the infrastructure that it takes to bring it to them. This may also go for the water in the creeks. Many people may not know that the water in some creeks comes from reservoirs or even from imported sources. Next slide, please. As most of you may not know, over half of the water used in Santa Clara County is imported. It takes billions of dollars of infrastructure to provide sustainable water for the county. We manage the groundwater, own and operate local reservoirs, receive water from the State Water Project and Central Valley Project, partner for recycled water, and have a robust conservation program. Next slide. This system is complex, as you can see on this map, and it needs ongoing care. In fact, the largest project we have in our capital improvement program right now is the Anderson Dam Retrofit Project, our largest reservoir that holds approximately 90,000 acre-feet. For a good portion, the clean water that for a good portion of the county that we have, the clean, safe water that we are supplying to many portions of the county could have been captured in Shasta Reservoir, pumped through the Delta, pumped into the aqueduct, pumped into the San Luis Reservoir, and then pumped to the Santa Teresa Water Treatment Plant and treated using robust and reliable technologies, including ozone, and then piped to our service area turnouts. With climate change, the need to take care of the environment, and aging infrastructure, both local and imported water is becoming less plentiful and therefore more expensive. Next slide. Valley Water is the groundwater management agency for Santa Clara County. Since the early 1900s, Santa Clara County has used more water than naturally occurs. Due to overpumping, land subsided 13 feet between 1915 and 1970. Subsidence is the compaction of the ground or the compaction of the soil in the ground to the point where it's no longer elastic, and so therefore doesn't rebound. So that 13 feet has been completely lost and will never come back. Valley Water has been diligently managing the supply and supplying the water to the county since then. Today, our groundwater levels are sustainable due to the investments that we previously made. Next slide. As I mentioned, our infrastructure is aging. Although the Anderson Dam was built to the standards of when it was built, new standards, new technology, and better safety are requiring us to rebuild the dam. Next slide. Droughts, climate change. So we are in a drought, and it wasn't that long before we were in our last drought. And not only that, but we're in a pandemic and all those other things. We also need to take care of the environment, and this means that there's less water available for all. Due to the shortage of local water and low imported water allocations, we are forced to call on our banked imported water supplies. We are also forced to secure additional emergency imported water. During these drier times, unfortunately, water prices also increase. Next slide. So what are we doing to look ahead to make sure that Santa Clara County has an affordable and reliable supply of safe, clean water? We have a comprehensive water supply master plan. This requires us to secure our existing supplies and infrastructure, expand conservation and reuse. I'll go into that a little bit further. And then, of course, optimize the system. As June was mentioning before, data and other things that we have can help us make sure that we're efficiently using every last drop. Water is not as available as it was before, and we need to make sure that we are using every last drop as efficiently as possible. These three elements provide a framework for providing a sustainable water supply. They strike a balance between protecting what we have, reasonably investing for what we need in the future, and making the most of our current water supply system. Thank you. Next slide, please. We believe in recycled water. There's no time like right now. We're second to driest years we've had since 1977. That we need a drought-proof, locally controlled source of water, and it will be part of our future. But recycling water is a little bit more expensive than some of the other sources that we have. Next slide. This is the good stuff. Conservation is key. Every drop that we save means one less drop that we need imported, one more drop for the fish, one more drop available for other things, and one more drop that we need to treat, and therefore keeps the rates, or helps us keep rates affordable. We have an aggressive program here at Valley Water, and we believe that conservation is part of our future. The interesting part about this is that it requires collaboration with everybody. Next slide, please. So most likely, conservation and recycling could be emerging topics that are going on in your jurisdictions. These efforts are only a success when there is collaborations with the cities, the counties, the wastewater agencies, the local water retailers, and the regulators. Conservation and possibly recycled water or other types of water are in the future for all. And we need to make sure that we're working together to understand what those efforts are and how we can be a part of that. As I mentioned before, with climate change and with other things, there's less water available, and we need to make sure that we're efficiently using every last drop. Next slide. So as I mentioned before, water rate affordability, we have investments. We need to deliver clean, safe, reliable water in the face of aging infrastructure, climate change, and new regulations. As I've mentioned, billions of dollars and other things are how costs are driving us through these particular things. Next slide. Valley Water has quite a few programs, and I think these are a lot of other programs that I'm hoping that maybe in your jurisdictions or in other areas you could think about or consider partnering with. We have direct customer programs. We have water conservation rebates. We have programs for low-income community members, U.S. veterans, and other disadvantaged communities. We offer free water saving fixtures. We believe conservation is really key to the future. Our water supply master plan and annual updates to right-size investments. It's very difficult with a crystal ball to kind of understand exactly how much water we're going to need in 2040, 2060, 2080, but we need to understand and make the right investments and right size those investments into the future. Believe it or not, after the 2013 drought, we actually, the great community of Santa Clara County hasn't actually rebounded back to what we'll call those previous drought conditions. And so we're understanding that and making sure that we're adjusting our investments and our plan to make sure that we can meet those new updated water demand goals. Effective asset management program to prioritize projects, of course, understanding and using technology to make sure that the infrastructure that we have is replaced and retrofitted and efficiently understood so that we can maximize the use and the life of the equipment we have. Pursuing state and federal grants for loans on infrastructure needs, WIFIA loans, and all sorts of other things that we can use to help us make sure that we can shave every last dollar we can for our capital investments. We're even looking in public-private partnerships, leveraging private funding where it's appropriate. And then the board just approved a water rate assistance program through a nonprofit. And with that, I know I covered a ton of topics, and I look forward to beginning the question and answer.
Wow, that was very impressive. All of our panelists provided us with so much detail. And so at this time, we're going to take a few questions, but I kind of want to kick off this conversation, and all of you can weigh in. I won't point out anybody to answer so we can have some fun. The first one is, what do you think is most important to California's water portfolio to increase? Anybody want to weigh in first?
I'll start. I think a key area, way that we can expand the portfolio is, as Aaron covered a lot of the work that Valley Water is doing in terms of efficiency, demand management, however you want to characterize it. I think there's a lot of opportunities there, and there's so much that we can do in that space. You know, at the last historic drought, there was a mandate to remove turf and encouraging all these different communities in California to reduce their water usage. And so in our experience, during a very short period of time, we removed so much square feet of turf. But yet that only represented just 1% of all the landscape opportunities that we have. So it really made us realize, and utilization of data, how we could identify these opportunities and do it in a way that's very cost effective. So I think there's a lot of work that can be done. But as you probably heard in talking about any kind of water portfolio, it's all the mix, all the things together. And in California, there is sufficient water to serve all communities. It's just that it's not located where the needs are. So I think a big part of that portfolio expansion, which is not really a resource, it's not conventional, is the people working together to manage this resource in a much more jointed way than we have in the past. And interconnectivity of our systems and our management of those systems, I think, is the real opportunity in being able to ensure reliability.
Thank you. Does anyone else like to answer that?
Well, I'd like to just piggyback on what June said. I completely agree, and I think the collaboration, a conservation program, you know, just being a water district, we can only do so much, but collaboration with the cities, the local retailers, nonprofits, all of those things to make and get the message out, you know, is really key. And of course, landscape, over 50% of the residential use is usually for landscape, and we have an aggressive landscape conversion program, one that we're actually doubling up, but we definitely see how, you know, understanding and making sure we have efficient landscapes, and not only that, but with the electeds that we have out here, probably efficient building. We also want to, you know, model landscape ordinances and other things like that, you know, for making sure that we have water efficient growth is also, I think, something that's key to managing water.
Alfred, you know, I was thinking your expertise is amazing when you talked about when you have to go and defend others to make sure that California is doing it right. What is your perspective on all of this in terms of what can California do better? That, you know, not to put you out of business, but that everybody is provided with water and not having to go through all these issues.
Well, I really can't speak to a lot of the policy issues, but what a speaker had mentioned earlier that really touched me was the creativity. I think it's important that water purveyors and the communities are creative in how they seek funding for these issues. Oftentimes, in our own business, we often hear water systems that have claims for contaminants that might be in their systems that are being detected, but they don't pursue them or they're not aware of them. And so they're not putting the feelers out there to find out what's available. And it's very common for us to hear about, oh yeah, you know, this community over here, they have this contamination, which there could be a viable claim existing for it, but they're not taking action. So I hear that a lot. And so I think what would be helpful is people just trying to look to as many different places for solutions to the problems that they're encountering. Because sometimes it could be something you didn't even think about that might have an answer to something you're facing. But because you're so stuck in this this pattern of working with the same people, seeing the same type of information, it's very rare that you branch out to this new area for information that could be very helpful. So that's probably the best thing I can contribute.
Thank you. You're so correct. Aaron, you know, you were talking about the groundwater management. I call it the groundwater management game. What do you think that groundwater management has in store for the mega drought that's supposed to be hitting California? I hope I'm not starting something.
No, and these are the things that definitely keep me up at night. I mean, you know, part of what we did or how we started was that we were over pumping our groundwater basin and subsidence occurred. You know, and as you could imagine, subsidence back then was an issue. But if we dropped a couple feet in Santa Clara County, and you know, billions and billions of infrastructure is there, so we aggressively are trying to figure, or we aggressively have plans and are understanding how we can recharge in certain areas, how we partner with with the pumpers to understand what are you doing, where are we working, and how we can work together to make sure that we work on that. And I think data forecasting and understanding, you know, the needs and making sure that we put the water, that we're recharging the areas where the water is being drawn out, and that we understand what's going on. Part of what we also have is our water shortage contingency plan actually talks about when the water gets below a certain level, then we're calling for conservation. We're doing certain actions that we can put into place so that we can prevent that water for the groundwater from getting so low that subsidence occurs. And that we are actually on the precipice of that right now, interestingly enough, and it's not even a mega drought. So we definitely need to understand, you know, how that works, and making sure that we have groundwater available. A good portion of our county, and I'm taking a little time, a good portion of our county, it's 100% reliant on groundwater. They have no other source. And so that's why we need to make sure that we're understanding, you know, the future and the reliability of that source.
Yeah, what is your perspective on that?
Oh, me? Okay. Well, I think, you know, Aaron covered a lot of it. When you look at the groundwater basin supply throughout California, you know, with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, what you're seeing is a depletion throughout the state. So you have farmers in the San Joaquin area who are very concerned about how they're going to move forward with their business because of the groundwater level dropping. So that's why, as we are heading into this, as you said, Mayor, the mega drought, and we know that there's going to be wet years and dry years, but every time there's a dry cycle, it's getting worse and longer. So this is why it has to be managed much more broadly than just everyone having their own areas, because there are opportunities to be able to do water transfers and exchanges and developing programs jointly to help fund some of these projects. Even though it's not a project in your service area, if you can have the benefit during these times of need and make an arrangement financially to incentivize those who have water to provide it to those areas that do not, then everyone benefits. And I'll give you an example. So I spent a couple of years in Northern California. And when I talked about the wooden flumes and the redwood storage tank, that's where I worked. And it was such an eye opener because we had three major surface water supplies. And we had more water in that county than we actually had a need for. But it was 19th most distressed county in the country at the time. And this was around 2010. And so what we started doing is, how can we take that valuable resource, take it to some other area that needs it, and then get some financial benefit out of it to help our communities. So these are some of the ways, as Alfred mentioned, creativity and collaboration. That's really the key to solving a lot of these issues, whatever it may be in water. But a lot of times what holds us back is, again, I talked a little bit about the will of the people, and there's personalities, there's feelings, there's baggages. And I think as we move forward, we need to get past that, look past that, to be able to come up with these kinds of creative and comprehensive solutions, particularly relates to groundwater, because, you know, even if it's in Central Valley, we get our food from those areas. So we are impacted by that.
Well, I'm glad to find out we're not going to have any North and South arguments on this presentation. We've got some questions in the chat. Let's see. Brianna, can you help us out with that?
I can help a little bit. So the first one is from Jeff Ellsworth, and he wants to know, are there any resources at the state level that kind of help small cities with concerns about PFAS, help them interpret data? Where can cities find resources on PFAS?
I would say that the State Water Resource Control Board, people like Alfred who have a lot of resources, I think reaching out and getting as much information as possible is really important. And again, when we look at these funding requirements to be able to treat to the level of safety, and as previous speakers have mentioned, as the technology gets better, we're going to find more constituents in water, but making sure that we have a plan of how we're going to address this and a financing plan that goes with that. But in terms of some of the resources, you can find it on the State Water Resource Control Board. I think with the internet, if you type in PFAS, it'll take you to a lot of different multiple links. But I always encourage people to actually talk to a person, someone like Alfred or others who are experts in this area, because they can give you not only the facts, but also some of the insights, which is so important to really understanding the issue.
Great. Well, if there are any other comments to that, I will pause for a minute, but we do have another question here specifically for Aaron. This is from an anonymous attendee. It's kind of scandalous. Can you share some additional information on the water rate assistance program y'all have at Valley Water? And maybe if there's a nonprofit you're working with, share some of that partnerships and any other information you can provide.
So we just started this, and so we've got money allocated to it, and we're working with either going probably with an RFP with a nonprofit, or there are some others that are existing right now that maybe we can partner with to kind of get that moving. So it's just it's starting up right now, and it was just passed as part of our budget from a couple of weeks ago. So more to come. I encourage them, if there's somebody interested in understanding more, you could contact me, or we could reach out through the website or through other areas if you're interested in figuring out, you know, where that is, and I can give you some additional information on where we end up with this.
Great. And then we have another question from Chin Ho Liao, and he wants to know that Congress passed the Dingle PFAS bill, or Dingle. Is there any funding available related to that bill, if anyone knows? Oh, we might need to find answers for that later. That's fine. And then I think there's another question from Chin Ho Lao, and he wants to know that firefighting, some of the, you know, repellents for firefighters that contains PFAS, and are there other solutions for fighting wildfires? I know none of us are firefighting engineers here, but if there are comments or feedback, yeah, go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, so this is actually it was it's a large concern for us, understanding, especially since we have local reservoirs in the area. Fortunately, we've been partnering with CAL FIRE and our local firefighting jurisdictions, and they're no longer using those types of things. In fact, ironically, it's interesting because all that runoff or those other things, we're also partnering with them for PFAS, and partnering, unfortunately, after wildfires is the sediment and other things that also end up in the reservoirs too. But for right now, at least in the Santa Clara County area, and the CAL FIRE SCU unit and our local jurisdictions are no longer using that foam. I hear that there is some still out there in some places, but maybe Alfred may know a little bit, but it's no longer being used, at least in our county.
Sure, it's my understanding that the PFAS that are a real problem right now is not the same constituent being used in forest fires. That's a different kind of firefighting foam. Traditionally, or typically, what you'd see was the type of PFAS that's really problematic at the moment has been from aqueous film forming foam, which is usually used around firefighting training facilities or airports, or other fuel depots where there might be fuel fires that need to be dealt with. So the big problem isn't necessarily the firefighting foam that they're dropping over the Sierras when there's those big forest fires. So
Great. I think we have time for maybe one more question. This is from Alex Rojas, and he kind of wants to know what role wholesalers can play in supporting small to mid-sized systems. So he adds that it seems that wholesalers can provide mutual aid to small water systems without need for consolidation. Wholesalers can spread the cost of CIP, treatment and operations across larger systems in a way that smaller mid-sized retailers may not be able to do. I know, Aaron, you work for a wholesaler. Do you have any thoughts on this? And then Junior, more than welcome to add your thoughts as well.
Yes. So I think that, we're a wholesaler, and we want to, we would definitely want to work to understand where those are and what things are looking at, and if there are ways that we would, if any of our retailers needed assistance or looked at kind of those things, One of the other things that we have to kind of look at is, well, for us, more like Prop 26, maybe more than 218 or other things, is that we can only charge certain buckets into certain areas. But that being said, we definitely want to understand if there was an issue in the county, or if there are other things that we wanted to do to help out. And we have, but mostly what we would like to do is work together to understand if there are other funding programs through DDW or through SAFER or through other things that we could definitely help move those things through. Are there legislative things that we could kind of work through as opposed to that kind of thing? I don't think that we're looking to take anybody over. We would be looking to help to make sure that the people could get the water that they need. And so without knowing the individual circumstance, but as far as being able to funnel money directly to certain things, we're still have to keep the right buckets in the right places to kind of get there. But that being said, understanding and making sure that that's there and doing everything we can within our power is part of, being responsible in our county, would be responsible for providing water for everybody.
Yeah, previous in my career, worked for a wholesale agency that represented 27 cities in Southeast LA County, and it was 98% Spanish speaking, a lot of disadvantaged communities in that service area. And there is a lot that wholesalers can do, because when it comes to getting funding, when it comes to advocacy, when it comes to planning, whether it's an emergency or just planning in general, there's a lot of support that the wholesale agencies can provide. Because ultimately in Southern California, we get all of our water from Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. So there's this sort of chain of how water is flown from one agency to the other, but there's a lot of resources along the ways. And I think the wholesalers can allow for these agencies to get connected to the right people, the right resources, represent and advocate for them. So just as an example, when I worked for this wholesale water agency, part of what we did as a wholesale is to get grants from the state, from Metropolitan, and then put it down to the communities that were in need, because they didn't have the resources or the capacity to do it themselves. So we did that support for them. And when there were issues with water quality, we represented them and became their voice at the state level or with the regulatory agencies, and just trying to really represent their interests in a much more focused way. So there's a lot that can be done from that level.
Great. Well, I think that covers as many questions as we can possibly fit in. Aquanetta, I'll pass it back off to you to close things out for us. Thanks, everyone.
I'd just like to thank our great panelists for providing great detail on a picture of what we need to do. How can we do it? And I'm sure that at some point in the future, people will reach out to all of you, because you are all just great talking about water, but it sounds like you've been in implementation format too. So thank you so much to all of you. And I'd like to thank Water Education for Latino Leaders for giving us all this opportunity to have this great discussion. And Brianna, you rock, girl. I just needed to say that. So thank you all for joining us today. And I think that concludes our WELL conference.